Minter made his debut as head coach, and the Eagles just couldn't get anything going against his defense. Third-string quarterback, a lost offense, numbers that were almost embarrassing to watch, the kind of performance that puts a smile on any Baltimore fan's face looking at the stat sheet afterward. But the more I dug into why that happened, the more I realized there's a question hiding behind that pretty result. Did this actually show us something about the defense Minter is going to run once the games start counting, or did the circumstances help dress things up? To answer that, you first have to look at who was actually on the field for both sides. The group representing the Eagles wasn't the team we'll face in September, and the same goes for Baltimore. Minter, for what it's worth, isn't the guy we need to study closely this preseason. That attention belongs to Declan Doyle, the rookie offensive coordinator who's still showing his hand through formation shifts, rookie receiver usage, and how he's building Adam Randall into a joker role. Minter's already a known quantity. He's spent years running defenses at a high level, and there's not much for him to prove or hide in August. That's part why this game is tricky to read. Baltimore's defense faced only 40 total snaps, a tiny sample even by preseason standards. 9 third downs came their way, and they stopped all 9. On the surface, that sounds dominant. But once you factor in how few snaps we're actually talking about, it starts to feel less like a statement, and more like a small sample doing what small samples do. Then there's the personnel side of it. Minter went with what can only be described as a hyper-experimental mix of players, resting even some of his more marginal veterans. The starting defensive backs weren't even dressed. That's not a knock on the group that did play, but it means we weren't watching Baltimore's real 2026 defense out there. We were watching a rotation built for evaluation, not for winning a preseason game against the Eagles starters. It's worth resetting expectations here before getting into what Minter actually called. This wasn't a defense trying to hide its identity or unveil something new. This was a coach running things about as basic as possible, because there was nothing to gain from getting cute in a game that doesn't count. Basic doesn't mean random, though. It means Minter was leaning on habits, and those habits tell us something real. Here's where the numbers actually start to mean something. During his 2 seasons running the Chargers defense, Minter sat in cover, 3 on 44.4% of his first down snaps. Against the Eagles in his Baltimore debut, that number came in at 40%. That's remarkably close. And honestly, it's the kind of consistency you want to see from a coordinator who's supposedly bringing a defined system to a new building. It doesn't stop there either. Overall, regardless of down, Minter sat in cover, 3 roughly a third of the time in this game. That tracks almost perfectly with what he was doing running Jim Harbaugh's defense the past 2 years. I'll admit, when I first saw that stat, it caught my attention because it means Minter isn't reinventing himself for Baltimore. He's bringing the same foundational coverage shell that's worked for him at the college and NFL level, and he's not shy about leaning on it even in a meaningless preseason opener. Why does that matter for us as fans? Because it tells you this defense isn't going to be built around gimmicks or trick calls designed to fool a third-string quarterback in August. It's built around a system Minter trusts, one he's used successfully before, and one he clearly believes will hold up against real competition. That kind of philosophical consistency is usually a good sign heading into a first season with a new team. Consistency in one area doesn't mean everything looked the same, though some of Minter's usual tendencies got flipped upside down here, not by choice, but by circumstance. That flip shows up clearest in the dime package. While Minter was in L.A., he played dime coverage as much as any team in the NFL, sitting in that package on 23% of his snaps. Against the Eagles on Saturday, he never deployed a dime look once. Not a single snap. That's a complete departure from what we've come to expect from him. And it's not because he abandoned the concept out of nowhere. The explanation is simple once you know the context. Minter didn't have his top defensive backs dressed for this game, and dime packages require exactly that kind of depth at the back end. Without the extra defensive back bodies available, there was no realistic way to run that coverage, even if he wanted to. It came down to roster availability, not a scheme decision. A reminder that preseason personnel groupings can be more about who's healthy than what a coordinator actually prefers. Nickel usage tells a similar story. Minter was in nickel personnel for 30 of his 40 snaps against Philadelphia, which works out to 75% of the game. With the Chargers, He was only in nickel around half the time. That jump lines up with something else buried in the report. Injury issues developing at the linebacker spot during the game. When your linebacker room takes a hit, you lean harder on extra defensive backs to cover the gaps. And that's exactly what played out here. In the end, this was a defense that stuck to its coverage philosophy in the one area that mattered most, cover 3 usage, while getting forced into different personnel groupings because of who was actually available and healthy. That's a pretty normal preseason story, but it raises a real question heading into Minnesota this weekend. If those linebacker injuries linger, does Minter keep leaning on nickel as a security blanket, or does depth at that position sort itself out before the game start to matter? There's another decision Minter made early in the game that helps explain a good chunk of this dominance. Leaning harder into blitz. He brought pressure 39% of the time against the Eagles, compared to just 23.6% during his time with the Chargers. My read is that he sensed early on his unit wasn't going to see the field much, so he decided to be aggressive while he had the chance to evaluate his pass rushers under real pressure situations. The results backed up that aggression in a big way. The Eagles managed just 76 yards through 3 quarters. Total scrimmage yards for Philadelphia sat at 168, but 45 of those yards came on what can only be described as garbage time scrambles from third-string quarterback Cole Payton. Strip that out, and production against Baltimore's front 7 and secondary was about as thin as it gets. Minter himself acknowledged the performance afterward, and I think his words are worth sitting with for a second. He said the defense did a good job overall, but that he would have liked to contain the quarterback a little better a few times. He called it, in his words, a lot of good stuff on film. That's a pretty measured response from a guy who clearly holds his group to a high standard, and it tells me he's not satisfied just because the stat sheet looked good against backups. I have to be honest, those quarterback numbers stood out to me more than anything else. Eagles quarterbacks averaged a brutal 3.7 yards per attempt, and that's notable because both Andy Dalton and Tanner McKee have carved up preseason defenses before. Philadelphia is also running a new offense under a new coordinator this year, so you can't tell me their staff was thrilled watching that kind of output. For Baltimore, that's exactly the kind of statement you want your pass rush and coverage combining to make, even against a lesser opponent. Minter said himself, the defense played well, but he wants better containment on the quarterback. That's a small, specific correction, not a systemic concern, and it's the kind of feedback you'd expect from a perfectionist who's already thinking about Week 1 instead of getting caught up in a preseason win over Philadelphia's reserves. There's a bigger comparison worth making here, too, and it's one every Ravens fan is probably already thinking about. Mike Macdonald ran the same defense for 2 seasons in Baltimore before Minter, and in 2023, he pulled off what's known as a triple crown: most sacks, most takeaways, and fewest points allowed in the entire league. That's an incredibly high bar, and honestly, I don't think the specific roster is built to replicate that exact feat again this year. But judging by what Minter installed in Game 1, that's clearly the kind of standard he's chasing, even if he'd never say it out loud after a meaningless preseason win. Minter knows who he is as a coordinator, and we've essentially watched this coaching tree before through Macdonald's 2 years running the same defensive principles in this building. The cover 3 usage, the situational aggressiveness, the willingness to adjust personnel based on who's actually healthy, all of that fits a pattern Baltimore fans have seen work at a high level recently. That continuity should be reassuring. Even with a completely different name calling the shots now. We'll get another look at this group Saturday afternoon in Minnesota, and I guess we won't learn a whole lot more from that game either, given how vanilla this first outing was by design. Still, every rep matters when you're building continuity at linebacker, evaluating depth at cornerback, and figuring out who earns real snaps once September arrives. The standard in Baltimore is high, and based on what Minter showed us in his debut, he's already coaching like he knows the execution needs to meet that standard starting in Week 1. When you step back and look at everything from this game, the story isn't really about the box score. It's about how closely Minter's cover 3 usage matched his career numbers, how the missing dime package and heavy nickel usage came down to personnel limitations rather than scheme changes, and how a 39% blitz rate helped bury an Eagles offense that managed almost nothing through 3 quarters. What this tells me is that Minter isn't trying to reinvent himself in Baltimore. He's bringing a system that's already proven itself at the college and NFL level, and he's adjusting on the fly based on who's actually available, not abandoning it because the calendar says preseason. That kind of steady identity matters heading into a new era, especially with the shadow of McDonald's Triple Crown season still hanging over this building as a standard everyone's chasing. So here's what I want to know from you. After watching Minter's debut, do you think this defense is on track to get back to that Triple Crown level, or is it too early to make that call with so many key pieces still sitting out? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you land on this one.
And if you're a true Ravens fan and love keeping up with everything happening around the team, don't leave this video without sharing it with a friend who's just as passionate. They're definitely going to enjoy this. See those videos on your screen right now? I picked the first one especially for you, and the other is recommended by YouTube. Go check them out, and I'll see you in the next video.